would like you to think back in your life and remember if you've ever tasted this magical essence to an experience you've been having. Perhaps you went walking in nature, perhaps you spent time with your beautiful partner, perhaps you were with a fun-loving dog, or perhaps you even took a magic mushroom that brings up these magical essential qualities in us. If you've ever experienced this magic, I would like you to imagine in your head what is the value of that experience, those emotions, and the perception of the whole of your whole consciousness having this magical hue to it. I think that is an immensely valuable thing to experience in ourselves, and I would rather have that magic in my life than millions and millions of dollars. Now, let's very quickly clarify, when I'm talking about magic, I'm talking about the perception of it, not voodoo and not supernatural or occult sort of themes. I'm talking about the emotion, the perception, the feeling of the universe being so awesome and inspiring that you as a consciousness are experiencing colors, vibrancy, life, joy. You can notice the mere fact that existence and consciousness is a thing. All of that is just magical in its essence. And perhaps you've heard of the word Ojas, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, which is the idea of it is that it is a very refined, very pure form of sensuality. So it's not constricted onto an object, but this Ojas, this sensuality, is like a wave flowing through our consciousness. So that's how I would describe, and the goal really for today is to get you to experience this, is this wave of magic going through one's consciousness. And I'm suggesting that if we can do this in daily life, through sober meditation and then through just sober living, then really what we're doing is eliminating suffering. And if you can do this, I would also suggest we can drop deep into the jhanas that the Buddhists talk about. And if you can drop into the jhanas, then we're really getting close to the brink of enlightenment itself. So this topic of magic in our experience, I believe it is very important. So mostly, I think we should address this, because most people watching my videos, as I can see from the analytics, we are men. And men as general, we sort of avoid, we're just not interested in these magical fairy or butterfly energies, but girls, they are much more attracted to it. And I would suggest that it's really good for men as well to explore that side of ourselves. And perhaps if you have some girly friends in your life, you can sort of get them to open up to these magical qualities of life and sort of just go on a ride with them. But really, what I want to offer you today is a nice analogy and then a practical step or practical plan for experiencing this magic at all times. But first, the analogy that I want to give today, maybe eagle-eyed viewers can already notice the change in the setup, but it is peacock feathers. The peacock feather, I think, is a really nice analogy for this wave of magic or this wave of Ojas. Because, to start, peacocks, they're very beautiful, but at the root of it, the reason that they're showing this beautiful plumage is to attract a sexual mate, and definitely this magic has that quality to it. It is very beautiful and very sensual, but a very refined, evolved type of sensuality. And if you've ever looked at a feather closely, peacock feathers included, perhaps you can take a nice close look one day. Feathers are interesting because on one hand they are very pliable, very soft, very smooth even, but feathers also have barbs on them. This is an important topic for today, the barbs. So depending on, we're going to say metaphorically here, the consciousness that's flowing through the feather, it can be smooth and refined, or the barbs can get tangled up and knotted. Because that's really the distinction here. In order to reach this magical flow of life, we want to refine our sexual essence into a flow. But when the barbed aspect of attaching our desires to something on the external world, when that comes into it, then the feathers, they get knotted up and we lose this magical essence, and we're left with instead a ball of just tangled up energy that is really tough and restricted and not flowy. Another reason I really like the analogy of a peacock feather is that when you look at its center, this image really reminds me of an incandescent flame. And talking about the Ojas again, this refined sensuality, this sensuality is like a flammable perfume, perhaps like an alcoholic perfume. And when you put a flame to it, it lights up. And there's an energy to it. And the flow, the magical flow of life is very much like this. It has a very deep vibrancy to it. The magic isn't inert and just sitting there. Even when we're totally at peace within ourselves, this magical quality is so springy in nature, and it makes us feel really, really alive and in the moment. Now that I've given my little analogy about this magical flow of life, perhaps you can experience that when walking through nature and just seeing the trees wave in the wind. How do we actually experience this magic on a daily, day-to-day, moment-by-moment level in total sober reality? Because at first, to get into touch with this magic, perhaps, that will be easy or difficult depending on where people are at in life. If you haven't experienced it before, you could explore taking a psychedelic and walking in nature, or you can go walking in nature with a playful girl. Perhaps her magic will rub off on you. But how can we experience this magic on a daily level? Because really that will be the end of suffering for our own internal system, and that will be such a massive reward for our spirituality. So I would suggest that this magical essence of consciousness is actually, what is the word? It is already there. It's not something we need to add, but instead all we need to do is remove the obstacle to the magic. So, what are the obstacles to feeling this magic in our lives right now in this moment? So I would suggest there are two sort of obstacles. The first isn't a soft obstacle, and that is thoughts. Now, if you're into meditation, perhaps you can drop thoughts at times, and you'll notice that the flow of your consciousness is so beautiful and so magical. And indeed, if we're getting into meditation, dropping your thoughts can be a fantastic way to feel the magic for prolonged periods of time. And perhaps if you're walking through nature, your thoughts might subside as you see the trees just moving in the wind. But at the same time, you can, over time, develop a skill where even thoughts become magical. When you're not having thoughts and you're just walking through nature, your perception very visually, very literally, feels like you're surfing on a big, long wave, and everything is sort of smooth and gradual with this really nice sensual vibrancy. But when you are having a thought, your consciousness becomes more like a spiral, like a whirlwind, or what's the proper word? I can't think of it now. A little tunnel of water circling in on itself. That is more what a thought is like. But that's okay, because if you become skilled at perceiving a thought for what it is, not getting caught in the illusion, the barbs of a thought, you just experience the thought purely, you can actually surf this spiral, and at some point the thought sort of spirals in on itself, collapses, and then you go back into the flow of life. But the point there is, if you become skilled at seeing a thought without its barbs, a thought in itself can be a magical flow. So to start with, thoughts can be an obstacle, and we can try and drop thoughts, and that can definitely help in getting us into contact with magic. But it's not a hard, it's more of a soft obstacle to our magical perception. But the very important one, the hard obstacle to experiencing magic in life, and this is a very deep topic that the Buddhists focus on a lot. This really is, you could use different words, we need to be careful here, there's a lot of nuance, but it is desire or striving. Because if you're out in nature and you're looking at some trees, the reason you're not experiencing that as magic, all the colors, existence itself, the flow of things, your internal energies. All of that is magic, but it's not being experienced as such because we have a desire that is telling us that what I have right now in this moment isn't good enough. What I need to be happy is that thing over there. So it is this striving, this desire that really takes us out of the magic and pulls us into basically all the suffering that we experience. So again, I want to bring into the talk here this concept of barbs, like the peacock feather. Our experience can be very smooth, but when we start to have an attachment or a striving to get something else, the barbs come into effect. And that really causes a lot of suffering in the human being. I think usually it is good for us to focus internally on ourselves and not to look out into the world at other people and sort of, the danger is that we look down on them. But I think for this particular exercise, it can be good to notice in other people in your life, friends, family, strangers, how much huge suffering is caused, constant suffering, by our constant wanting of something else. And this is a very tricky topic, actually. I wouldn't say this is at all easy or shallow or something you can just get like this. Hopefully you get it super quick at God's speed. But the tricky aspect here of these barbs is, to be metaphorical here again, is the barbs can be like Satan's tail. If you've ever seen a picture of Satan, just the classic silly example, he has a tail, but at the end of the tail, there's very often a barb. And what is so tricky about this barb, this tail, is how close it can get to our sincere heart's desires, or our genuine wanting to do good in the world, our desires for love. The desire for love and love itself is not a bad thing. If we are living in this magic of life, we actually can become extremely good at manifesting our heart's desires. I would suggest, in the context that I'm speaking now, the heart's desires do not have any barbs at them at all. The heart's desire might be to just look at a bird, it might be to talk to a stranger. The heart's desire can be very genuine. And as an example, let's take like a really nice heart desire. Perhaps you want to start a dog rescue and you want to buy a property, build a building there to keep the stray dogs and find them all beautiful, wonderful homes. That feeling can come from your heart. It can be even a magical feeling. But then this Satan's tail, to be metaphorical, comes so close to our hearts and it barbs our beautiful heart's desire. It barbs the magic that we have to do something beautiful. And what Satan's tail does is it says, I will only be happy once I've completed my mission. And perhaps you're in this flow and you want to buy a property, but you have a setback and the one you had a really good feeling about was too expensive and all your plans sort of fall apart. Then we have suffering in our lives because our magical desire didn't come true. And what happened there is the peacock feathers barbed up. So there is a very subtle nuance here in noticing in our own perception. And maybe this is a bit advanced, but I hope people can get into contact with this. You guys are taking psychedelics. I think a lot of you are quite advanced. You can notice in your perception when the magical flow turns into the barby aspect. And again, this barbs, they can come really close to our heart. So it's a very tricky topic to separate the wheat from the chaff. We really need to drop really as deeply as we can just into the flow of nature without having any attachments and then feeling those come up moment by moment. Just the conscious awareness of it is what makes the change in our lives.